The market opened before the sun did. Stalls unfolded like tired lungs, breathing colour into a grey morning. Among them, a small wooden table, a girl's hands arranging watercolour sketches beneath a flickering light. Her scarf was thin, her breath measured. Each painting carried fragments of the sea she hadn't seen in months, waves she painted from memory. Across the street, a man walked his daughter to school. His jacket was work-stained, his eyes restless. The girl tugged his sleeve and pointed toward the artwork stall. "She's cold," she whispered. He almost kept walking. But something, quiet and insistent, made him stop. Sometimes kindness begins where reason ends. The town woke slowly, like a hand unclenching after sleep. The air still held the night's chill, silvering the breath of the few who had risen before dawn. Wooden stalls creaked open one by one. Metal shutters scraped against brick. Somewhere, a kettle hissed its first boil. Leah sat beneath a rusted awning, folding a wool blanket over her legs. Her chair was old, paint peeling along its frame, but it held her steady. On the table before her lay a collection of watercolour paintings, each one soft, deliberate, and touched with the same fragile warmth she rarely felt herself. She lifted one carefully, a small postcard of a shoreline she once knew well. The tide was pale blue, the sand curved inward like a question. She stared at it for a long moment before placing it down, aligning it perfectly beside the others. Her hands shook slightly when she reached for the price tag. It read, "Pay what you can." The morning light hadn't reached the square yet. It would take another hour for the warmth to find her, if it ever did. From the other end of the street came the slow rhythm of a pushcart. The baker. The sound meant life continuing, even when yours felt paused. Leah rubbed her thumb against the edge of her blanket, grounding herself in its coarse weave. Her cough had been worse that week, each one pulling something raw from inside. She'd told herself it was just fatigue, but the next round of chemo was due in 2 days, and her envelope, the one marked hospital, held barely enough for one treatment. So she painted, every night, until her fingers cramped, until the paper smelled faintly of rain and medication. Across the street, someone laughed. A full-bodied laugh that broke the morning silence. Leah looked up briefly. A man and his daughter walked hand in hand toward the bus stop. The girl's backpack was too big for her frame. Her scarf trailed like a comet behind her. Leah smiled faintly and looked away. It wasn't envy. It was just remembering. The father, Ethan, worked the early shift at the theatre. He was used to walking fast, to keeping his world small enough to manage. But his daughter, Lila, saw everything. She tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, what is it?" "That lady. She's selling pictures." He followed her gaze. The girl in the wheelchair sitting under the awning, surrounded by colours that looked too hopeful for such a cold day. "She's fine, sweetheart," he murmured. "Let's not be late." They kept walking, or almost did. Because just then, Leah coughed, a sharp, dry sound that cracked the still air. Lila turned again, her small brows furrowed. "Daddy," she said, more insistent now. "She looks sick." Ethan stopped. The moment held, just him, his daughter, and the sound of water dripping from the eaves. He could have kept walking. He'd done that before, past people whose lives didn't fit inside his own. But this time he didn't. "All right," he said quietly. 1 minute, he crossed the street. Leah looked up, startled. The man approached slowly, as if not wanting to disturb the air around her. He nodded toward the paintings. "These yours?" She nodded once. "They're beautiful," he said. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice barely carried past the table. He picked up one, the ocean one. The blues were soft, uneven. The horizon shimmered like memory. "This place real?" "It was," she said. "Once." He hesitated, then reached for his wallet. "How much?" Her reply was quiet but firm. "Whatever feels right." He placed a folded note on the table and tucked the painting under his arm. "Keep the change," he said. She looked at the money, not the man. "It's more than it's worth." He met her eyes then. "No," he said softly. "It's not." Lila approached from behind him, her small hand clutching a coin. "Can I buy one too?" she asked. Leah smiled, the kind that didn't reach her lips, but softened her posture. "Of course. Which one do you like?" Lila pointed to a small piece near the corner, a tiny sunrise painted with shaky brushstrokes. "That one looks like it's trying," she said. Leah blinked. "Trying?" "To come up," the girl said. "Like it's not sure it can." The words lingered in the space between them. Ethan looked down at his daughter. then back at the artist. He couldn't find anything to say. Leah wrapped the small painting in brown paper. Her hands trembled slightly, but she folded the edges neatly. "It's yours," she said. "How much?" Lila asked. "Just keep it," Leah replied. But Lila shook her head. "Then it's not fair." She placed her coin on the table, a small silver offering. Leah smiled again, this time closer to warmth. "Fair enough." As they turned to leave, Ethan caught her looking at the envelope near her lap, the one with the hospital's name faintly visible through its worn paper. She tucked it quickly under a sketchbook, as if hiding a secret she hadn't meant to show. He didn't ask. He just nodded once more and crossed the street with Lila. Behind them, the market grew louder. Vendors shouted prices. Buses hissed, but Leah stayed quiet. Her world small again, her breath steady. She looked at the coin Lila had left, turning it between her fingers. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the look on that child's face, the way she'd seen her without flinching. For the first time in days, Leah let herself exhale fully. The sun reached her corner just then, soft and uncertain like a question. It rested on the edge of her table, warming the paper where her signature dried. She picked up her brush again. The next painting began not with colour, but with stillness. The painting leaned against the theatre wall for 3 days before Ethan really looked at it again. At first, it was just there, half wrapped in paper, resting by the rigging cables he used for light installations. The crew had moved around it like it wasn't real. But one evening, when the show had ended and the stage lights cooled to amber silence, he finally unwrapped it. The sea, the horizon drawn with a shaking hand, the kind of blue that didn't exist in nature anymore. Too fragile, too human. He ran his thumb along the brush texture. It was rougher than he'd expected, the kind of texture that came from fatigue or determination. He didn't know why it mattered, but something in the painting stayed with him, like a song caught between verses. At home, Lila was already asleep when he arrived. She always left her drawings spread across the kitchen table, suns with faces, boats with crooked sails, hearts that floated in the sky. Tonight, one of her papers had something different, a stick figure in a wheelchair beside a large blue circle. He looked closer. Underneath, in her small, uneven handwriting, she'd written, "Miss Leah." He stood there for a while, his hand resting on the back of a chair. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The walls felt thinner than usual, like sound itself didn't want to disturb the peace. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning came with rain, the kind that didn't pour, just hovered, misting the air in soft patience. Ethan walked Lila to school with his coat over her head like a makeshift umbrella. She ran through puddles, laughing, but when they passed the market corner, her laughter stopped. The awning was empty, the table gone. Only a damp square of concrete remained where Leah had been. "She's not here," Lila said quietly. "No," he said. "Maybe she stayed home." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. But something inside him, that same small, restless pull that had made him stop before, told him it wasn't that simple. That afternoon, after finishing his shift, he asked the baker near the stall, "The girl who sold paintings here, where'd she go?" The baker shrugged. "The one in the chair? She hasn't been by since yesterday. Think she lives off Bay Street, near the old laundromat." "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "She forgot something." He didn't explain what that something was, mostly because he didn't know. The rain had grown steadier by the time he reached Bay Street. The pavement glistened, light smearing into puddles. He found the laundromat easily, half its sign missing, letters flickering against the wet brick. Next to it was a narrow staircase leading up to a dim hallway. The smell of detergent and rust hung thick in the air. He climbed slowly, the wood groaning beneath each step. At the top, he found her door, pale blue paint, chipped at the corners. He knocked once, no answer. Again, still nothing. He turned to leave, but then he heard a sound, a faint cough, deep and uneven. "Leah," he called softly. The door opened a few inches. She was there, pale, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes tired but awake. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "How?" "The baker," he replied. "I just wanted to see if you were all right." She blinked, unsure how to respond. The silence filled the small space between them. I'm fine, she said at last, though her voice made it sound like a question. I brought something, he said, lifting a paper bag. Bread, still warm. She hesitated before opening the door wider. You didn't have to. I know. The apartment was small, one window, a table covered in paints, and a hospital letter lying open beside it. She saw him glance toward it and quickly turned the page over. He set the bread down, the smell mixing with paint and rain. Lila wanted to visit, he said. That's kind, she murmured. She drew you something. He handed her the small folded paper. Inside was the drawing, the one from the kitchen table, the stick figure beside a sun. Under it, another note. Come back soon. Leah's eyes lingered on it longer than she intended. She's sweet, she said. She doesn't stop until she's understood someone. That's rare, Leah said softly. Ethan nodded. Yeah, it is. The clock on her wall ticked quietly, a slow, uneven rhythm that filled the pauses neither of them tried to break. Can I ask, he said finally, why you stopped coming? She looked down. Bad week. The treatment? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. He nodded, not pushing. All right, then I'll bring the market to you next time. She looked up, confused. What do you mean? I'll tell Lila we're setting up an art stall here. Customers, one small child, one man who knows nothing about painting. A faint smile appeared, the kind that looked more like surrender than amusement. You don't have to do that, she said. Maybe not, but maybe we should. She exhaled. Something between a sigh and a laugh. You really don't know when to stop, do you? Not when it matters, he said. For a moment neither spoke. The rain softened outside, thinning into mist. Then she said quietly, Ethan, do you ever feel like you're waiting for something that isn't coming back? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Every day, he said, but sometimes what comes instead is enough. She didn't reply, just looked out the window, where the clouds had begun to lift. He stood then, adjusting his jacket. I'll leave you to rest, but I'll be back tomorrow. For what? To learn how to see. The door clicked softly behind him. That night, Leah sat by the window again, the drawing still in her hand. The bread sat untouched, the letter still unread, but something felt different, as if the air itself had made room for something she hadn't expected to want again. She turned the hospital letter over and looked at the number written in the corner, then at the small pile of coins beside her. Not enough, not even close. She reached for a new sheet of paper and began sketching, not because she had the strength, but because she had a reason. The brush trembled, but the colour still spread. This time she didn't paint the sea. She painted a face. Not his exactly, but the memory of someone who had stopped when the world didn't ask him to. The next morning, when the sun touched her window again, she was still painting. Morning came in shades of pale gold. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving behind a kind of stillness that made the world sound too honest. Footsteps sharper, air colder, silence deeper. Ethan stopped at the market again, though he knew she wouldn't be there. He stood where her table once stood, the concrete still darker from yesterday's rain. Around him, vendors set up their stalls, fruit, flowers, cheap trinkets, all colour and noise and movement. Yet somehow, her absence filled more space than their chatter did. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe proof that she was real beyond the painting. Maybe an excuse to keep showing up, sir, someone called. He turned. It was the baker again, wiping his hands on his apron. You looking for the artist? Yeah. She left this behind last week. He handed over a folded sketchbook, its edges frayed, paint stains marking the cover. Ethan hesitated, then took it carefully, as if it could fall apart if he held it wrong. He didn't open it until later, when he was alone backstage again. Inside were portraits, quick pencil sketches, each unfinished. A mother and child on a bench, an old man feeding pigeons, a woman waiting at a bus stop with rain on her face, and then, one that stopped him, a small girl laughing with her hands full of chalk. He knew the line of that laughter, the hair tied unevenly. Lila. Below it, faintly penciled. Hope looks like her. He didn't move for a long time. That evening, when Lila came home, she saw the sketchbook on the table. Miss Leah's? She asked. Yes. Did you see her? I did. Is she coming back? He didn't know what to say, so he said, maybe we should go to her. The next day, they went. Leah's window faced the street, but the curtain was drawn. Ethan knocked softly. Lila hid behind him, clutching a folded paper like a secret. The door opened slower this time. Leah looked weaker, but her eyes were sharper. "I thought you were joking," she said. "I don't usually joke about art lessons," Ethan replied. Lila stepped forward, holding out her paper. "I made a ticket," she said. "For today's class." Leah smiled. "A real one, the kind that rose from somewhere unguarded." "Then I guess I have no choice." They set up on the floor. Old newspapers, open paints, a chipped mug filled with brushes. Lila painted first, her strokes wild and bright. Ethan tried to follow, but his brush hovered uncertainly over the canvas. "Just move," Leah said gently. "You're thinking too much." "That's my problem with everything," he muttered. She watched him try again, her voice quiet. "You can't control paint. You can only trust it to fall where it needs to." He looked up at her. "That's either wisdom or laziness." "Both," she said, and for a moment they both laughed. The sound was small, but it filled the room like sunlight. After a while, Leah paused to catch her breath. Her hand trembled as she reached for a cloth. Lila noticed first. "Are you okay?" the child asked. Leah nodded, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Just tired." "Dad gets tired too," Lila said. "But he still makes pancakes." "That's because pancakes are easier than healing," Ethan said. Leah smiled faintly. "Not always." They painted until the light faded. When they packed up, Lila handed Leah her brush. "You keep it," she said, "for next time." Leah looked at the small paint-stained handle. It wasn't just a gift. It was a promise. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, Ethan left something on her doorstep. The painting she'd sold him. The sea horizon now framed in wood. No note, no message. Just the quiet return of something that belonged to her more than to him. When she saw it the next morning, her breath caught. She touched the glass lightly, tracing the faint brush lines she'd made weeks ago. On the back, written in pencil, she found 5 words. "You don't owe the world." She sat there for a long time, the morning light growing stronger on her hands. Then she turned the canvas over, set it on the easel, and began to paint again. Not for money this time, but for breath. Days passed. Each afternoon, Ethan and Lila stopped by for lessons. Sometimes they painted, sometimes they just sat by the window talking about nothing. Leah grew thinner, but her laughter grew louder. She didn't say it, but she knew these visits weren't about charity. They were about remembering she still existed beyond her illness. One evening, when the sun turned orange through the curtains, Leah asked, "Why do you come?" Ethan thought about it. "Because you remind me what still matters." "And what's that?" He looked at her, then at Lila playing quietly in the corner. "Staying when it's easier to leave," she didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. A week later, Leah was admitted to the hospital again. The chemo hit harder this time. Her paints sat untouched by the window, but taped to the wall above her bed were Lila's drawings. Boats, suns, and one new sketch, 3 stick figures holding hands beside a blue horizon. The nurses said a man and a little girl came by each morning, leaving coffee for them and flowers for her. They never stayed long, just enough to see her breathing. On the 7th day, she woke to find something new on her bedside table. Her old sketchbook, the one Ethan had kept. Inside, a new page, a drawing of her, sitting by the sea she had painted. Only now she wasn't alone. The pencil lines were uneven, the perspective wrong, but it didn't matter. It was the first time someone had ever painted her. When Ethan visited later that day, she didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, the quiet between them heavier than words. "You drew that," she said finally. "I tried. You made me look alive." "You are." She closed her eyes. "Not for long." "Then let's make the rest of it loud enough to echo." Her lips trembled. "You don't have to." He stopped her. "I know, but I want to." And for the first time since they met, she let herself cry, silently, without shame, as though the tears weren't weakness, but proof that she still could. He didn't move to comfort her. He just stayed. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing, rain starting again. The city unaware that somewhere, in one quiet hospital room, 2 strangers had rebuilt the smallest kind of hope. The rain came back that night, not with thunder, but with memory. It streaked softly across the window of Leah's hospital room, tracing lines down the glass like hands trying to hold light. The city outside blurred into something gentler, quieter. Ethan sat beside her, sketchbook open on his knees. He wasn't drawing, just watching the sound of the rain fill the silence they'd made together. Leah had fallen asleep an hour ago, her breathing shallow, steady, like a candle flame caught between burning and fading. Lila had fallen asleep too, curled in the armchair, her small hand still clutching one of Leah's old brushes. The nurse came in quietly, adjusted a monitor, and left without a word. The world was holding its breath. When Leah woke again, it was morning. The first thing she saw was the painting by her bed, the sea she had once sold. The frame caught the new sunlight like a halo. "You brought the morning," she said softly. Ethan smiled, eyes tired. "You keep doing that." She turned toward him, eyes still heavy. "Did I sleep long? Long enough to miss breakfast?" "Then it was worth it." They both laughed, faint, real, exhausted. And then she looked at Lila, still asleep in the corner, hair tangled, breathing softly. "She reminds me of before," Leah whispered. "Before what?" "Before everything became about surviving instead of living." Her voice broke slightly at the edge, but she steadied it with a breath. "She sees me like I'm not dying." Ethan looked away for a moment, pretending to read the monitors. Maybe that's because she doesn't see dying the way adults do. How do they see it? As an ending. And she? As a pause, he said, before the next painting. Later that day, Ethan took Lila home while Leah rested. The sky was the same color as her old paintings, soft gray brushed with light. They didn't speak much in the car. The world after hospitals always felt too loud. At a red light, Lila said quietly, "Dad, when people go away, do they know we miss them?" He glanced at her. "I think they do. Even if they don't come back." "Especially then." She nodded, satisfied enough to stay quiet again. But Ethan couldn't stop hearing her words. "Do they know?" He thought about Leah's hands, stained with paint, the way she still apologized for being tired, the way she looked at life as if she was trying to memorize it. He'd seen grief before, but this was something different. It was grief still in progress, still trying to earn its own name. 2 days later, he returned. The nurse stopped him in the hallway. "She's painting again," she said, smiling. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Inside, Leah was sitting up, pale but fierce, brush in hand. The smell of turpentine and rain filled the room. She was painting the sky outside her window, the morning light turning from grey to gold. "It's called When the Sky Changed Colour," she said without looking up. Ethan stood quietly beside her. "You're painting your view." "No," she said. "I'm painting yours." He didn't understand until she turned the canvas toward him. The brushstrokes shaped not the skyline, but a man and a child standing under it, small but solid against the light. "You stayed," she said simply. That night, she gave him the painting. "Keep it," she said, "for when I can't." He refused at first, but she insisted. "Art doesn't stop when the artist does," she said. "It just changes owners." He took it, not as a gift, but as permission. Winter came faster than anyone expected. Leah's health declined slowly, then all at once. Her hands weakened, her voice thinned, but she never stopped painting. Even on her hardest days, there'd be new sketches by the window, blurred horizons, fading colors, unfinished strokes that looked like they were still reaching for something. The nurses said she spoke of the sea often. She'd tell them it wasn't about the water, but about the in-between, the space between waves, between breaths, between what's lost and what remains. One morning, Ethan found her asleep with her head resting against her easel. The brush had fallen from her hand. The painting, half finished, showed a small boat in the distance. No figure, no shore, just open water and sky merging softly. He stood there for a long time, the hum of hospital lights the only sound. When he finally looked away, he whispered, "You finished more than you think." The call came 3 days later. It was early, too early for anything but bad news. Lila was still asleep when Ethan sat on her bed. He didn't say the words at first, he just held her hand. When she finally asked what was wrong, he said quietly, "She's gone." Lila didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling. "Will she paint in heaven?" she asked. "I hope so," Ethan said. "She'll probably repaint the clouds." They both smiled, brokenly, but together. A week later, they went back to the hospital to collect her things. In her sketchbook, between empty pages, they found a note. It wasn't long, just a few words written in faint ink. "Thank you for letting me stay human." Ethan read it twice, then folded the page carefully. He didn't need to understand it fully. Some gratitude was meant to be quiet. Months passed. The market reopened for spring. Lila set up a small table, just like Leah used to, with a sign that read, "Art for the ones who stayed." People stopped, smiled, bought her small paintings of skies and boats, and hands holding brushes. Ethan stood behind her, watching the world turn softer again. In the distance, the horizon blurred with light, the same way Leah used to paint it, unfinished, imperfect, infinite. And when the wind changed, carrying the scent of rain again, Ethan looked up and whispered. Sky changed again. Lila nodded, eyes on her canvas. "Maybe she's painting it," she said. Ethan smiled. "Maybe she always was." Spring folded into summer quietly, not with fireworks, but with small kindnesses. The market was alive again. Children ran between the stalls, ribbons trailing behind them. Vendors called out prices in the soft rhythm of repetition. The air smelled of oil paint, citrus, and rain. Lila sat at her small table beneath a striped umbrella. Her brushes were shorter now, used often, worn at the edges. Each canvas she made carried something of Leah. A horizon, a streak of gold, a silence that looked like breath. She didn't sell them for money. Instead, she traded a loaf of bread, a handmade bracelet, a folded poem written by a stranger. Ethan watched from the edge of the crowd, not interfering. He'd learned that grief needed space, the same way art needed air to dry. One afternoon, an old woman approached the table. She studied the paintings carefully, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly. "This one," she said, pointing to a small canvas of two figures standing beneath a fading sky. "What does it mean?" Lila tilted her head. "It's about people who stay when they don't have to." The woman's eyes softened. "Not many do," Lila nodded. "That's why it's rare." The woman bought the painting and left without another word. Ethan didn't miss the way she wiped her eyes as she walked away. He turned to Lila. "You're getting good at this." She shrugged. "I had a good teacher." They both knew she wasn't talking about him. At home, the painting. When the sky changed colour, hung above the fireplace. Its colours seemed different every day, sometimes grey, sometimes gold. Ethan often caught himself looking at it after midnight. When the world went quiet, he'd imagine Leah somewhere unseen, still painting skies that refused to stay still. He didn't visit the hospital much anymore, but once, near the end of summer, he drove past it and parked outside. The window of her old room was open. A white curtain fluttered outward like a hand waving goodbye. He didn't go in. He just sat there for a while. Engine off, eyes on the window. Then he drove home in silence, the road shimmering under the late sun. Weeks later, Lila brought home something unexpected. A small box wrapped in brown paper, addressed simply, "For the ones who kept looking up." Inside was a folded cloth, white lace, hand-stitched with faint golden thread. Ethan recognized it immediately. It was Leah's work. She had finished it. Somehow. Before the end. The lace was shaped like waves and light, stitched together as though the sea itself had been translated into fabric. At the bottom corner, a small embroidered line read, "Stillness isn't the end." Lila held it close. "She made this for us," she whispered. Ethan nodded but said nothing. Some truths were too delicate to speak aloud. They framed the lace beneath glass and placed it beside her painting. Now, the two works faced each other, the sea and the sky, eternal conversation partners. Autumn arrived quietly. The market grew colder, but Lila still painted. Her fingers reddened from the chill, but she never complained. Sometimes, Ethan brought her hot tea and just sat nearby reading, not speaking. People began asking for her paintings by name. "The girl who paints horizons," but she always said, "They're Leah's skies. I just keep them going." Ethan realized then that legacies weren't things carved in stone or signed on paper. They were gestures, passed hand to hand, brushstroke to brushstroke. One morning, a gallery owner visited the market. He noticed Lila's work, small, quiet pieces full of restraint and light. He offered to buy several and feature them in an exhibition titled Echoes of the Sea. Lila hesitated. I don't want people to think they're sad, she said. They won't, the man replied. They'll think they're honest. She looked to Ethan, searching. He smiled. If Leah were here, she'd say, let the world see. So she did. The night of the exhibition, the room glowed with soft light. Paintings lined the walls, seas, skies, quiet moments frozen between breaths. People moved slowly, whispering, their reflections rippling in the polished floor. In the center hung Leah's original, When the Sky Changed Color. Below it, a small plaque read, In memory of an artist who taught us that stillness can move. Ethan stood back, hands in pockets. Lila slipped her hand into his. She'd like this, she said. He nodded. She'd tell us to stop watching and start painting. They both laughed softly, a sound that carried through the gallery like warmth. When the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Ethan lingered near the painting. The colors seemed alive again, shifting with the room's breath. He whispered, You stayed longer than you thought you would. And for a moment, he swore the gold in the paint flickered back, as if light itself remembered her name. The following morning, the market was quiet. Rain again, the gentle kind. Lila unpacked her brushes beneath the awning. Ethan poured coffee from a thermos, steam curling upward like memory. She began painting without looking at the canvas, just moving the brush in rhythm with the rain. When she finally stopped, she stepped back. On the canvas, the faint outline of a woman stood at the edge of water, facing the horizon. No face, no detail, just presence. Beneath it, she wrote 3 words. The art stayed. Ethan leaned closer, reading it once, then again. He didn't correct her grammar. He didn't need to. It was perfect, unpolished, truthful, alive. He looked up at the sky. It had changed color again, the kind of color you couldn't name, only feel. Some stories don't end. They simply change mediums. The girl kept painting. The man kept staying. And somewhere between the sea and the sky, the woman who taught them both how to see was still painting too, with colors made of memory, in the silence that follows rain.